Hey, so today we're going to be reacting to part 3 of the Korps of Krieg by Arch. As always, I'm going to be leaving a link to the original video and channel down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check them out. And I'm not going to be wasting any more time. Let's go ahead and get right into the video.
Although, I'm not entirely sure whether I would prefer to carry a Hellgun or a plasma gun, since both of the weapons have an uncomfortably high percentage chance of murdering their users. It is a very, very small wonder indeed that casualty rates amongst the Grenadiers are particularly high, even amongst the Korps of Krieg. This is also the reason why they're given the special cool-looking helmets with the skull-faced mask on them, because the men wearing these helmets are as good as dead. On average, 8 out of every 10 Grenadiers will end up in a very small box if he's lucky, or smeared across the landscape as so much pizza topping if he isn't. But hey...
Wait, so when he says small box, I mean, I'm assuming he's saying coffin, right? And so, I mean, it's good to know that they at least, bury some of them, right? And, I mean, but if not that, then you're probably just to be pink mist all over the battlefield. And then also when he said, like, the 8 out of 10, so, like, around 80% of the people are gonna die. That was really reminiscent. I might sound dumb, but I think it was during in Iraq, where I don't remember the exact percentage for people being like the first guy on the stack that's going into a building, but the percentage was in the 90%, right? That if you were the first guy going in, that you're probably gonna die, or it was in the 80% as well. I'm gonna have to look that up after, but if you know, please let me know, because I feel like that's kind of pretty similar, right, in terms of like your survivability.
Hey, at least he had the honor of being selected by his watchmaster or commissar to join the Grenadiers, the elite of the Korps of Krieg, and it really is considered a privilege and an honor. Granted, they don't have the right to refuse the honor either, but an honor still is an honor, and
again, a lot of that voluntold type of stuff, but I feel like in this kind of case scenario, they don't really mind.
As for privilege, well, it doesn't have much in the way of privileges. It is not a promotion. You retain the same rank as you did in the regular Death Corps, but, well, you get a fancy helmet, which is going to end up getting you killed, granted, but hey, details. And if you should be so incredibly fucking lucky as to actually survive, that makes you eligible for Watchmaster training. And Watchmaster is the first official rank one must achieve on the long and extraordinarily thorny road towards that fancy-ass officer's helmet, and is de facto a non-commissioned officer, the rough equivalent of a sergeant in other Imperial Guard regiments. As you probably...
So equivalent to like because it said non-commissioned officer, equivalent to like our corporal. But I mean, all that just to get to that length? Fuck.
Gathered by now, when a Death Corps regiment is raised, all of its officers, including its NCOs, are brought in from other formations that have, in all due likelihood, been wiped the fuck out. Or, if by some utter goddamn miracle, have actually had too many officers, which, considering the casualty rates, is pretty rare. Nevertheless, any Death Corps formation would not be complete without its NCOs, as these are the men responsible both for training the raw recruits and instilling in them the proper sense of responsibility that the battlefield requires. After all, they've had it easy up until now.
I mean, granted, that's kind of really the same thing. I mean, it was supposed to be the same thing, right? Like, say, if you're a corporal in the Marine Corps, you're at least minimum are probably going to be a team leader. You might get put as a squad leader unless there's already a sergeant there, but typically you're always going to be more in that leadership role, which I already know that you can probably understand or assume that. But sometimes you get guys. Now, I'm not dogging on anybody from security forces, but sometimes, because when the guys eventually start coming to the fleet, right, they got a deployment under the belt, although it's doing a lot different job, and I understand for them. They haven't really focused a lot on what we do, like infantry-wise. So if you ever get like a security force guy who actually goes and starts asking questions and actually like try to get this knowledge down, because for the most part it's probably going to be stuff that he doesn't even know. That's when you know you got at least a corporal who's going to be willing to reach out for help, to at least understand what he's going to be doing, right? But sometimes you get guys who just think, hey, just because I'm a corporal, I'm a quote unquote senior because I've been on some kind of deployment, chilling wherever they were at, that some of them are just going to kind of assume that they can just take the role, right? And a lot of the times it doesn't really work out that way, at least in my experience. And a lot of the times it ends up being a lance corporal who was actually a senior. So that can be kind of there tends to be some friction every now and then with some security force guys going into the fleet.
The Watchmasters also double as squad leaders. In your average Death Korps of Krieg regiments, you would have 82 Watchmasters, one for each individual infantry and or heavy weapon squad, one per platoon command squad, one veteran Watchmaster per company command squad, and finally, the role of Watchmaster for the regimental commander is taken by the regiment's commissar. Furthermore, each Watchmaster has himself a personal little butt boy, a teacher's pet if you wish. This is his senior guardsman aide. This is essentially his second in command, whether it be in the squad, in the platoon, or in the company command squad. He is also a person...
So, kind of like your APL or assistant patrol leader. Although, I don't know if it's an aide just to help him for whatever he needs done, or someone who's actually there to take over in case he does die. I mean, I would assume a little bit of both.
That the Watchmaster is essentially grooming for the role of Watchmaster. Natürlich, he still has to survive his period in the Grenadiers, but considering he's been under the personal tutelage of a Watchmaster, somebody who already made it through their Grenadier service, his chances of surviving are probably 3 in 10, rather than 2 in 10. Now, presuming that our hopeful little cadet has not only survived his Grenadier service, but also made it through his period as a Watchmaster, he will reach the first commissioned officer rank of the Death Korps of Krieg, which, interestingly enough, is not a direct command position at all. Or, well, it is, kind of, but not in the way you might expect. The Quartermaster is an interesting amalgamation of battlefield medic, administratum clerk, and ecclesiarchy preacher. He's supposed to wander the battlefield during and after a battle and retrieve casualties. Although, well, to be fair, retrieving casualties is his secondary duty. His primary duty, as hinted at by the name Quartermaster, is to get their equipment back. After all, replacement personnel are a dime a dozen. Krieg spits those out by the millions every single year, but lasguns, power packs, bayonets, chainswords, rebreathers, boots, uniforms, these things can be damn hard to get a hold of, especially since all of those millions coming out of Krieg also require all of these things before they leave the planet.
This is kind of like their version of a Space Marine thingy. The guy who played Nero in Hell's Apothecary. Apothecary? The guys who take the gene seeds back. Obviously, except in this situation, they're taking primarily the weapons, right? And he also does have the same thing that Nero had in Hell's Reach, as far as like the little blade on the arm. I don't exactly know why he would use that. Maybe helping someone that might still be alive, although unlikely. Retrieving the body. Well, at least I would assume in this case, I mean, because I'm pretty sure he said that it would be during that they would grab the weapons, and also after. So probably you're facing less combat situations, I guess, to put it simply. So it's less likely to get shot maybe in this job role, although I'm kind of just speculating here. I could be completely wrong.
Now, of course, the Quartermaster isn't entirely heartless. He will aid soldiers that are wounded, with certain qualifications, shall we say. The role has its origin during the brutal Civil War, when resources were extraordinarily scarce, and in fact the most expendable resource for both sides was manpower. This meant that neither of the warring sides really wasted much in the way of resources on men that wouldn't fight again, and it was the Quartermaster's task to determine who deserved medical attention, because they could be returned to the fight within a relatively reasonable time frame, and who had earned the Emperor's mercy. which is of course a term used to describe a battlefield execution.
I'm assuming that's why he's got the knife. Maybe a quick slit of the throat, quick pierce of the heart. At least it happened quick.
These days, the quartermasters are a little bit more merciful. Not in that way, I mean as in actually saving them, because they have access to considerably larger resources and considerably more technology with which to return troops to the front line. But even then, it is the quartermaster's job to put the needs of the regiment ahead of those of any single individual wounded soldier. This means that if the quartermaster deems that the same amount of resources that would be spent on one severely wounded man could potentially save 2 others, he will not hesitate a single instant to put a lasbolt through the first man's head, pausing just long enough to deliver him the Emperor's benediction to make sure that his soul flies straight and true to the Emperor's side. Which, to be fair, it might. The Emperor is at this point pretty much a Chaos God. It's not entirely impossible that he's got himself a little part of the warp somewhere where these poor pitiful souls can rest. The alternative, well, let's not dwell too much on that, shall we? It'll make an already rather depressing episode even worse. And as for the command aspect, as mentioned, the quartermaster is a commissioned officer, which means that he is officially commissioned to lead men into battle, unlike the watchmaster who is a non-commissioned officer. However, the quartermaster, as mentioned, do not lead soldiers. Instead, they usually surround themselves with a gaggle of medical personnel and servitors, since of course quartermasters are few and far between, and after a nice big battle of marching slowly into machine gun fire, there is more than enough for a quartermaster to do, so much that he needs to delegate at least a little bit.
I wonder how a Krieg would feel being in this type of role, just because I feel like they would be more down for being able to, like, charge the enemy, right? I don't know why I did knife hands there, but I feel like this would be kind of a more, I wouldn't even say admin side of things, but maybe like administration side of things. As far as, I mean, he did say that they do some of that, like ecclesiarch administrative side, but from like trying to compare it to today's world, I feel like it's more on the admin side, to them at least.
Assuming that the person in question survives the quartermaster role as well, which, by the way, is probably the safest of the ones so far, then he will finally become a proper officer, with a proper command and everything, and the usual rank structure will now reassert itself. There are, of course, another couple specialized roles within the Death Corps, however, beyond the usual guardsmen, these being a Death Corps engineer and a Death Corps rider. The riders are not so much a specialized branch as they are a pseudo-elite within the Death Corps. They are cavalry.
He was one of the ones from the Death Korps Krieg animation film with the Dark Angels, which I got wrong the first time. I called them the Salamanders, I think. So these guys, are like the more elite. And I did hear that the actual horses are also modified in a manner. I just saw the feet right now.
That specialize in direct assault. Yep, that's right. Whilst most cavalry in 40k perform a harassing role, essentially meaning that they're motorized infantry without the motor part, that they will descend from their horses and fight on foot, the Death Riders, they utilize their hunting lances in the way they were always meant to do, in straight-up, massed cavalry charges. Now, this would be suicidal for pretty much any Rough Rider regiment, but the Death Riders are equipped with the Krieg steeds. This is a very, very heavily genetically modified version of the original Terran horse, although at this point it's probably got more in common with a fucking grizzly bear than it does a horse. These things have been known to take several heavy bolter rounds to the chest, essentially pulping virtually all of its internal organs, and still keep going for another couple hundred meters. Despite all
this kind of makes sense now within the animation video when they're charging the Chaos Marines, right?
all of this, the casualty rates amongst the Death Riders are actually relatively small when compared to the infantry. Of course, when they are actually in direct combat, they die like absolute fucking flies, at a rate that even the infantry would shake their heads at. but for the most part they are deployed as light screening troops, as scouts, and as a rapid breakthrough force. They are not, generally speaking, hurled against entrenchment and bunker complexes. Due to this somewhat unusual nature, the members of the Death Riders are usually selected for two traits that in the infantry would be considered highly unfitting indeed, and that is independent thought and initiative, both of which are considered dirty, filthy curse words in the infantry. But due to their role as advanced scouts, breakthrough troops, and screening troops, the Death Riders have to be able to make independent decisions without waiting for their higher commanders to give them instructions. But this...
See, now that's interesting, because obviously you would assume with the Krieg, you know, especially in their basic infantry guys, but now especially with these guys, since these guys are considered more like the scouts, and the fact that being like a former scout, or this is essentially like their special forces, right? I mean, in their world, there might be a lot of them, but obviously not as much as your basic grunts. And because of that, obviously you're going to be within enemy lines, if not behind them, a lot more often. Although, I don't know how true that is with these guys, but obviously that's where the whole individual action, actually starting to think for yourself. Sometimes you even have to adapt on the fly. And obviously you just can't be waiting for orders like that, right? So, I mean, we also do it, like, when we were in the Marine Corps, like in the fleet, really teach you as far as being able to like really think for yourself, right? Because especially one prime little example was when we were actually doing mount, and we're being told, hey, go across, we're trying to get from one building to the other. Turns out one of my buddies saw that there was a barrel sticking out of the building through a window that my squad leader didn't see. And instead of just saying, well, I was told to go over there, and then we just went, no. But he pointed it out to the squad leader because he was like right next to him. So he said, negative, hey, can't do that. I see a barrel popping out. All of a sudden, he looks over there because he didn't see it. And then all of a sudden, now we're just having to change plans, right? So it's really great that really, it sounds weird, right? Just think for yourself, or at least think about things. But it's very crucial.
This self-reliance is not entirely unique within the Death Corps, although relatively rare. There is one further branch of the Death Corps military that also needs to have the ability to make decisions on the fly, and that is the second and last specialization, Death Corps Engineers. If the officers are the brain, the Death Corps riders its eyes and ears, and the infantry its lifeblood, then the Death Corps Engineers are the strong hands of the army. They are the ones that dig the fortifications. They are the ones that prepare the positions for artillery. They are the ones that dig the offensive saps, allowing the infantry to get closer to the enemy's position without having to wander unprotected through no man's land. And all of that is, of course, before we get to their true, main military purpose, that of digging massive fucking tunnels underneath the enemy's lines. I
just saw the little e-tool or shovel right there. It brought a little smile to my face.
For offensive purposes, e.g. burrowing into the enemy's trenches and then unloading thousands upon thousands of guardsmen, or by depositing vast quantities of explosives and making sure that the enemy lines simply cease to exist. Unfortunately, the enemy is very rarely particularly fond of this eventuality, and will do everything in their power to stop the engineers from completing their mission. This leads to a peculiar and extraordinarily nasty form of warfare, partially because the two sides are essentially blind. Even the most high-tech 41st millennium technology can only do so much to identify an enemy that is sitting behind literal tons and tons and tons of earth. This means that every single swing of a pickaxe, every single move of a shovel, could potentially collapse in on an enemy mine, which leads to a very quick, very vicious, brutal close-quarters encounter, where the two sides will be fighting each other in a literal trench, perhaps a couple meters wide and a couple meters tall at most, and frequently considerably less than that. And once an enemy mine has been broken into, all bets are off. The Death Corps Engineers are given a huge quantity of specialized equipment to fulfill their variety of roles. Bolt cutters, auspexes, shotguns, long saw blade bayonets, folding spades, melter charges, mole launchers, frag grenades, crack grenades, carapace armor, specialized gas mask, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, I understand now that crack was supposed to be another name for a grenade, which people told me in the other video. But you know what I heard? I'm forgetting all those. I'm sure that it's cool stuff. I started thinking about all that weight and how it's going to hamper you down. And you just got to be very physically strong. I'm sure they are, but damn. And not to mention, I don't see this dude carrying a backpack. I would assume they would have some kind of backpack or something to be able to carry everything in, especially some of the more smaller things, right? So that way it's not all just kind of sticking out of everywhere and maybe it gets caught on something and then they can just open it up real quick, take something out, put it back on the back. I would assume they'd have backpacks though. If not, they should.
But perhaps one of their nastiest weapons are their gas hand grenades. These pump out a particularly vicious form of gas that is capable of even eating through gas masks if they are exposed to the gas for long enough periods of time. Now, of course, the Death Corps engineers are fully aware of this, and yet they will not hesitate a single second in deploying these weapons. Any and all actions taken underground are bound to be short, vicious, and extraordinarily bloody for all parts involved. And perhaps the worst thing is that it is far easier to collapse a mine than it is to build it, which means that when a mine is discovered, the enemy is sitting on all the cards as to how to deal with it. And even if the Death Corps engineers are capable of breaking into the enemy mine quickly enough and decisively enough to stop them from collapsing it, you can bet your happy little ass that they will definitely be collapsing the exit. This can, in most cases, lead to the Death Corps engineers losing days, weeks, possibly even months or years worth of work in mere minutes. It can be an extraordinarily trying form of warfare. Not only are you under constant stress due to the fact that at any moment all hell can break loose, you also have to deal with the fact that rather frequently all of your hard work is going to be for absolutely nothing. It's the kind of warfare that is quite likely to break a man, but fortunately, the men of Krieg have seen worse, and will continue to see worse for as long as they are serving within the Death Corps. If anything, this really is the form of warfare that suits their demeanor the absolute best. And finally, of course, we come to the humble...
I'll say that the way he was describing them, the engineers seemed like they would be the ones who are probably the most famous for using their e-tools or shovels, right? Because obviously they're going to be fighting within meters of each other, and some a lot of hand-to-hand combat would probably be the most effective solution, right?
Krieg Guardsman. There's nothing particularly special about him, except for the fact that he is probably the toughest fighting man in the entire galaxy. Of course, except for the post-human variant. He's also equipped in a rather fascinating way. On one hand, he has a very high-tech and very powerful respirator unit, along with a fully chemically and biologically sealed uniform. Their boots, their gloves, their greatcoats, their helmets, their respirators, absolutely everything is worked with special chemicals. And the guardsmen are constantly resupplied with fresh pots of this chemical to rub into their clothing, making sure that it remains proof against practically anything and everything the enemy can throw at them. Once fully dressed up, a Death Corps guardsman is essentially invulnerable to any and all forms of bacteriological or gas-based warfare, with a few exceptions, the Life Eater virus, of course, being one of them. This near-total immunity allows the Death Corps to deliver large-scale gas attacks to the enemy, while still allowing their infantry to advance practically unscathed. And whilst...
The Life Eater virus, that sounds very familiar. I don't know if it's the one that hampered the Emperor's children, right? I think they were the ones that had a disease that was going around their gene seeds that just wiped out like a big chunk of it. Or I think it was the Emperor's children. I don't know. I might be wrong. But it sounds very familiar, and that's the only disease that I can remember off the top of my head.
This would be an extremely traumatizing and claustrophobic form of warfare for pretty much anybody. Just imagine wandering through a battlefield. Bullets are whizzing all around you, your helmet is deafening the sound, your gas mask worked in with all kinds of chemicals stinks to high heaven, and your sweat causes it to stick to your face in a very uncomfortable manner. You can barely see anything, and what you can see is constant boiling clouds of gas, and you are painfully aware that a single rift in your uniform will leave you dangerously exposed to said gas. This is the kind of situation that a lot of people would probably start panicking, but for a Death Corps guardsman, this is normal. They are, after all, trained to wear their gas masks at pretty much any and all times during the day. Every single one of them has undergone dozens, if not hundreds of hours in training in artificial gas chambers, and in all due likelihood, considering the severity of Krieg training, they've probably been bombarded by gas weapons on more than one occasion whilst training, quote-unquote.
I'll tell you right now, they got more balls than me. I took the gas chamber in the Marine Corps in boot camp. I felt like I was going to die. I believe I already explained the story about that. Did not like it. Would never want to do it again. I had to do it again every year. But I just thought of a quick little thing. Because sometimes with a gas mask or any mask in general, right, there's always a chance of, and it's kind of off topic, the eye holes being able to like fog over. I mean, I'm assuming they'd have an anti-fog, but it's something that kind of popped into my head.
For them, attacking during a heavy artillery and gas barrage would be absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. But for all of the advanced nature of their uniforms, they do carry a surprisingly archaic primary weapon. Their main weapon is the Lucius Pattern No. 98 lasgun. This is a variant on the standard issue lasgun primarily produced on Krieg, and it has a fair few little quirks that makes it quite different from the standard issue lasgun. The most noteworthy and obvious is probably the fact that it is a single-shot weapon only. It has no other firing modes, no overcharge mode, no burst fire, and no automatic fire. Every time you pull the trigger, the weapon is going to do the exact same thing one time, and one time only. In return, however, the weapon is considerably more powerful than your standard issue lasgun, round about 12 to 15% more oomph per lasbolt. This does, however, also come at the cost of rate of fire, with the number 98 firing considerably slower than the standard issue lasgun.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, even though I know that the lasguns, right, don't really have any recoil, from what I've always been told, right? And obviously that would be kind of one of the bigger things, that if you were shooting automatic, that the recoil would always be an issue. But if there's no recoil, then people, typically when they're shooting, right, I consistently see people shooting from like almost the hip area using the other type of lasgun. But with this one, the fact that it can only shoot one, it really focuses you, at least in my opinion, and to really like aim your shots accordingly, right? And if it's stronger, then again, that's something that may or may not translate very well, because obviously for us, we would shoot one because like an M4 and M16 does have recoil, right? And shooting it on burst would be a little hectic, right? Every time it's going up. But the fact that shooting one at a time, possibly in this case scenario, would probably be a lot different, because you're obviously going against a lot more people, or like a lot more beings, like say for example orcs, right? Yeah, so many of them coming at you. Shooting one at a time may not be the most effective, right? You probably want something that at least, but then again, the other lasgun is a lot weaker, even though you can shoot a lot faster, right? So it's kind of, I'm assuming it's just dependent on what the Krieg want, right? I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting concept.
And finally, to really hammer home the point, due to the increased power of the weapon and the fact that it uses a standard las pack, it only has 25 rounds per power pack magazine. The Lucius Pattern No. 98 lasgun is a precision weapon. It's got the sheer force to put practically anything on its ass, but it requires a cool head and a steady pair of hands to get the most out of it. This is definitively not a weapon for those easily frightened.
So I'm assuming this one has a little bit of recoil then?
And finally, of course, every Krieg guardsman's favorite possession, their combat bayonets. a 45-centimeter long sword bayonet made out of specially treated razor-sharp plasteel. The Death Korps of Krieg's elan and bravura on the charge is well known throughout the Imperium, and along with their VAT-birthed technology, they are also granted the standard template construct for a special form of combat knives. This STC technology creates knives that are lighter, sharper, and easier to maintain than pretty much any other bladed weapon in the Imperium, and it is more than capable of making a complete and utter mockery out of practically any form of standard issue body armor. And speaking of armor, the Death Korps doesn't get any, except for their greatcoat, which will provide some form of limited ballistic protection, but not much. It might be enough to save a Death Korps guardsman from a hit by a ballistic or las weapon at the extreme end of its effective range, but you probably don't want to bet on it. Of course, there is also a pair of shoulder guards, but, oh wow. I suppose that if you are so lucky as to get shot only in the shoulder, then God Emperor knows, I suppose. They might...
I thought about that too. It's always the shoulder too, right? That has the armor. I've seen it with the Cadians. I've seen it with the Krieg here. When you look at a Space Marine, what are the biggest things, right? It's either the helmet or your actual shoulders, right? Now, obviously, it's because there's too many of them and they cannot get. But I mean, I would assume they would at least try to protect some of them, at least some of the more higher ranking ones, with some kind of I don't know, some kind of Kevlar. There's form something to put sappies in or something. I don't know, metal or something, right? To at least try to keep them alive. Although I know resources as far as armor might be an issue, considering the fact that they would want probably more firepower and thus produce more weapons instead of actual gear.
Save you, but their primary purpose is simply to have the regimental number along with the individual infantry number placed upon them. Basically so that the quartermasters can have an easier time checking off the casualty lists. As for non-combat related items, the Death Korps of Krieg Guardsman will carry with him two different maintenance kits. One for his number 98 las gun, which due to the sheer amount of heat it produces can be a somewhat temperamental weapon, and one for his respirator, which is probably hands down the most complicated piece of kit he possesses. These are both carried in a standard issue leather backpack. In addition to this, he also has a bedroll which doubles as a waterproof half shelter, and a series of dry tin canisters. These are quite special in that they are isolated from the outside environment, which means that they can keep food and other perishable items fresh and edible even in the most hostile of climates. And, of course, considering their love for siege warfare, they carry a series of entrenching tools. Usually this is a foldable spade, but in the case of heavier entrenchment works, they will be issued with pickaxes and larger shovels. As for ammunition, the standard loadout is 4 lasgun power packs, along with a single frag grenade and a single crack grenade. Additionally, each member, with the exception of the sergeant and the senior guardsman, is expected to carry one form or another of ammunition for the squad's specialist gunner. This could...
Alright, so you said 4, so 4 mags essentially, right? I mean, we carried 6, including the one that would be inside our actual magazine well. And the guys who had IRRs are... we're going to be carrying, I think it was 12. I think they carried double what we carried, and then obviously we would probably have one person carrying more mags. I forgot the name for it, but essentially you're going to be carrying some more gear. Or sometimes we're carrying some gears for some of the other guys, like sometimes machine gunners, sometimes mortars, and our assault pack. Obviously he just mentioned that too right now, as far as which honestly really helps spread out the weight, right? Helps the machine gunners get into position a lot faster because they're not have to carrying as much, or it helps the mortar teams get into position a lot faster as well.
Would be hydrogen flasks for a plasma gun, additionally promethium for a flamer, grenades for a grenade launcher, or energy packs for a melter gun. Now, in reality, this loadout is a little bit light, since it would give the average guardsman about 125 rounds of ammunition for his las gun, which probably is nowhere even remotely close to enough for an extended engagement. And whilst most guardsmen understand rather quickly that the art of scavenging ammunition...
I was just about to say that, and I was about to pause it before he said anything. I was going to say that they're just going to take it off the dead bodies.
...is probably the most important art a guardsman could ever learn. On Krieg, they follow the rules. And the rule says you bring 4 packs, 1 frag grenade, and 1 crack grenade. But luckily, their officers all come from the ranks that have previously gone through the exact same shit that they are going to have to go through now. And they realize that these rules are perhaps a little bit too strict. As such, whenever a formation is expected to enter into combat, their standard issue loadout is usually bumped up quite considerably. And then, the final piece of kit issued to every single Krieg Guardsman is their shoulder pads. These are used to identify which platoon, which squad, and which regiment the Guardsman is from, as well as identifying him to others as he receives his final piece of equipment, quote-unquote, that being his new name. In the Death Corps, you don't go by your old name. In fact, you don't go by a proper name at all. You are simply issued a serial code and or a number. This goes true even for higher officers, and it might be reissued upon gaining a higher rank. For example, the commander of an entire regiment might simply be known as Alpha 1. This is partially done as a simple expedience because, well, Death Corps regiments are used to rather high casualty figures, and as such, being able to keep the list nice and easy and tidy is very valuable, and of course, it has symbolic value. Once a man joins the Death Corps and receives his number, he is, for all intents and purposes, already dead. All that remains now is for him to commit to and complete his final sacrifice. Then his name will be crossed off a list and he can go and sit by the Emperor's side, his sacrifice and duty finally complete. And with that, as the Guardsman's life officially ends and he begins his period of sacrifice, we'll wrap up this video on the Death Korps of Krieg.
Alright, let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. Only just a minute. Now, I gotta ask the question. Out of all these different jobs right here that you just heard from the Krieg, which one would you pick? Personally, pick this one. The guy would be the medic. I feel like I would have a lot longer of a survivability. Although a lot of this is going to be dependent on how fast or if you are able to move up, obviously, because high chance of dying. And if not, I feel like I would choose these guys. I don't know what it is. Specifically something with this armor piece. It's just, I don't know, they got a lance. It's like very old school type of cavalry, and I don't know, it speaks to me in a sense, right? And then also you get this badass looking horse. Just kind of going through it, all the jobs that we just kind of heard right now. Was it the engineer one? Kind of seemed the worst to me, just because I don't like being in open bodies, natural water like the ocean, right? Because I always get the feeling like something's gonna touch my leg and it's gonna be a shark, or being underground, right, where something can fall on you. Specifically, say for digging tunnels. When they said that he had a kit or some kind of thing that I'm assuming it would be for the rifle, right, to ensure it's in working order. You always got your rifle cleaning kit. I wonder, like, what exactly, or if someone has a way, or if someone has a video that actually shows, like, someone taking apart, like, say, a bolter, a las gun, a melta gun, anything like that, just to kind of see how it's all put together, right, and just see, like, what exactly would you have to do to be able to, I guess, maintain it, right? I mean, obviously, some of the plasma weapons, you gotta let them stop them from overheating. Even with this rifle, even in today's world, right, when you got an M4 and you're consistently shooting a lot, that barrel's gonna get hot. But when we're cleaning the actual rifle, we're looking for all that carbon, you know, within the bowl, within the actual barrel. We're looking for even like maybe signs of rust that we can try to get out with some COP. And I wonder, like, is overheating maybe the only thing that they would have to deal with? Maybe, I don't know, maybe they got maybe a stovepipe, right? Like a type of malfunction. Or what are some malfunction procedures, right? If for some reason the las gun doesn't want to shoot. You know, things like that kind of creep into my head. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. Really does help me improve the channel. Leave me little comments to maybe what it was. I'll see you all on the next video. Bye.